In the heart of a gleaming corporate headquarters, where glass walls glistened and high heels clicked across marble floors, Denise Atwater moved like a ghost. Quiet. Steady. Invisible. Her navy blue janitor uniform blended into the background, and no one paid her much mind. Executives brushed past her in a blur of coffee cups and phone calls. Interns barely noticed her as they chased down elevators. To most, she was just the janitor. Another face in the machinery of success. But what no one knew was that Denise carried more than a mop. She carried 7 languages, a world of experience, and a quiet grace that would soon bring an entire company to its knees, and then lift it higher than it had ever been. It began, as revolutions often do, with something small. A new intern named Raj was standing in the lobby, flustered and red-faced, trying, and failing, to communicate with a French-speaking visitor. The receptionist looked helpless. Time ticked by. The guest grew frustrated. And just when it seemed like things would spiral into embarrassment, Denise walked by, pushing her cleaning cart. She paused. Tilted her head. Then, in a calm and flawless French accent, she stepped in and translated the entire exchange. The tension dissolved. The visitor smiled with relief. Raj stood there, dumbfounded. "Wait, you speak French?" he asked. Denise offered a humble smile. "Among others." And just like that, the whisper began. Later that week, a confused Russian delivery man showed up with no English skills. Once again, Denise stepped in. Smooth. Precise. Fluent. Then came a group of visiting executives from Mexico. The translator was late. Denise, who just happened to be buffing the floor nearby, handled it with ease. Spanish. Mandarin. Arabic. Italian. Each time a language barrier rose, Denise bridged it effortlessly. No fanfare. No drama. Just quiet brilliance in a janitor's uniform. People started to notice. They stared a little longer when she walked by. Some began to greet her. Most just whispered. Who was she really? But not everyone was impressed. At a company luncheon, one of those staged networking events where executives clinked glasses and interns hovered nervously at the edges, Denise was assigned to clear away plates. She moved quietly between tables. Then, near the head of the room, she overheard a tense conversation between the CEO, Mr. Lawson, and a Chinese supplier. The translator had already left. Confusion was mounting. Denise hesitated for a moment. Then gently stepped forward and offered a perfect Mandarin translation. The room fell silent. Mr. Lawson looked up, surprised. "You speak Mandarin?" he asked. Denise nodded. Enough to help. But before she could explain further, one of the senior executives scoffed. Loudly. "She's a janitor, not a linguist. Let's not get carried away." A few people chuckled. Denise lowered her eyes. And quietly walked away. But Mr. Lawson didn't forget. The very next day, Denise received an unexpected invitation to the boardroom. She entered cautiously, still wearing her janitor uniform. Executives murmured and stared. What was she doing here? Mr. Lawson stood at the head of the table and gestured toward her. "This," he said, "is Denise Atwater. She speaks 7 languages. She's quietly solved more international communication problems in this building than we have with all our consultants combined." The room went still. Then he turned to her. "Denise, where did you learn all of this?" Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I used to teach at a language institute. Lost my job during a round of cuts. Took the janitor role because it was steady. But I never stopped learning." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. That same week, Mr. Lawson promoted her to Director of Multicultural Communications. It shocked the company. Some applauded. Others questioned it. But Denise didn't waste time trying to prove herself. She got to work. She built language programs, trained staff in cultural competency, and helped secure new international partnerships. Within months, the company's global client satisfaction skyrocketed. They expanded into 3 new markets. And all of it, every milestone, traced back to the woman they had once ignored. As for the executive who mocked her, he was quietly let go after mishandling a critical deal with a South American partner. Denise took over that account. Handled it in flawless Spanish. Closed the deal in half the time. One afternoon, as she was settling into her new office, a young janitor passed by her door. He looked overwhelmed, and he only spoke Swahili. Denise rose, approached him kindly, and spoke to him fluently. His face lit up. Relief flooded him. And for a moment, he stood there, just like Raj had months ago, blinking in awe. Denise smiled gently and guided him to the right hallway. Then she returned to her desk, where a new brass nameplate gleamed under the soft office light. It read, Denise Atwater, Director of Global Communication. Fluent in 7 languages. Fluent in humanity. Because sometimes, the most powerful people in the building aren't the ones with the corner offices. They're the ones no one notices, until the moment they become unforgettable. Despite her new title, Denise didn't redecorate her office with luxury furniture or swap her humble wardrobe for expensive suits. She kept her space simple, organized, efficient, and lined with books in multiple languages. A framed photo of her late grandmother, who had raised her and spoken 5 languages herself, sat on the corner of her desk. That quiet reminder kept her grounded. Denise wasn't here to show off. She was here to build bridges, between cultures, between departments, between people. At first, some employees were skeptical. A few whispered about token promotions and symbolic moves. But Denise didn't flinch. She let her work speak. In her first month, she introduced a language access app that allowed every department to communicate more effectively with international clients. She created lunchtime immersion sessions where employees could learn the basics of Spanish, Mandarin, or French over coffee and sandwiches. Attendance started small. Then it grew. And before long, entire departments were showing up, laughing, stumbling through new phrases, building something far greater than fluency, trust. But it wasn't just about language. Denise began hosting cultural insight sessions, monthly roundtables where employees from all backgrounds could share personal stories, traditions, even recipes. These weren't stuffy DEI presentations or HR checkboxes. They were real conversations. Vulnerable. Honest. Sometimes uncomfortable. Always transformative. During one session, a senior executive admitted he had grown up in a community where diversity was rare. And that, until recently, he'd never truly thought about the immigrant experience. He choked up as he listened to a young assistant manager from Nigeria describe what it felt like to constantly be underestimated. At the end, the executive stood up, walked across the room, and shook her hand. "Thank you," he said. "You helped me see." These moments became the new heartbeat of the company. But not everyone was ready to grow. One afternoon, a high-ranking VP barged into Denise's office, furious over a cancelled contract with a German firm. He blamed Denise's department for overcomplicating the process with cultural sensitivity guidelines. "You're slowing down business with all this understanding people stuff," he snapped. Denise didn't raise her voice. She just calmly opened her laptop and played back a recorded Zoom call from the previous week, where the same VP had interrupted a German executive mid-sentence and made a culturally insensitive joke. "You didn't lose the deal because of me," she said gently. "You lost it because you weren't listening." The VP went silent. Then quietly excused himself. Weeks later, after attending one of her workshops, that same VP returned to her office. This time, he brought coffee. And an apology. Denise didn't gloat. She simply nodded and smiled. Growth takes humility, she said. But once it starts, it rarely stops. By her one-year anniversary as director, the transformation was undeniable. The company had opened offices in Tokyo and Lagos. Employee satisfaction scores hit record highs. Multilingual hires increased by 40%. Internally, people were speaking to each other differently, with more respect, more patience, more heart. And on the anniversary of her promotion, Mr. Lawson hosted a company-wide town hall. The auditorium was packed. Cameras streamed live to every global branch. He took the stage and cleared his throat. 1 year ago, he began, we nearly lost a major international contract because we didn't have the right translator on site. A janitor stepped in and saved the deal. Today, that same woman leads our global communication strategy. But what she really gave us, was vision. He paused. Then turned to Denise, who was seated in the front row. Denise Atwater taught us that talent doesn't always wear a suit. That wisdom isn't measured by a title. And that humanity, is the most valuable language in any business. The room erupted in applause. Denise stood slowly. Tears welled in her eyes, not because she needed the recognition, but because, after all these years, her voice was finally heard. Not in 7 languages. Just one. The one that spoke to hearts. And that's the real legacy she left. Not just a better company, but a more human one. Because in the end, greatness isn't about where you start. It's about how you show up, day after day, when no one's looking. Until one day, everyone is. After the applause faded and the cameras were turned off, employees lingered in the hallway, many lining up just to shake Denise's hand. Some brought handwritten notes. Others brought tears. One young woman, a newly hired receptionist from Haiti, approached Denise quietly, clutching a small, worn-out notebook. She opened it to a page with a quote written in French. My grandmother told me to never silence my voice just because the room is louder, she said, eyes glistening. Today, you reminded me that she was right. Denise smiled, placing a hand on the young woman's shoulder. And now it's your turn to remind someone else. Over the following months, Denise's impact rippled outward, not just through the company, but into communities. She partnered with local high schools to create a mentorship program for multilingual teens from immigrant backgrounds. She offered internship opportunities to young adults who spoke English as a second language, giving them a path into the corporate world that had once seemed sealed shut. She even returned to the janitorial break room one evening, long after most had gone home. The room was quiet, still. The same vending machine buzzed in the corner. She sat on the worn-out bench she once used to rest between floor shifts. This time, she sat in silence, letting the moment breathe. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Mr. Lawson. Let's make sure the break room gets an upgrade. Start where respect begins. A week later, the janitorial staff walked into a transformed space, complete with new couches, a stocked fridge, multilingual signs on the walls, and a plaque above the doorway that read, Every voice matters. Every role has dignity. This is where greatness begins. Denise Atwater. That plaque would go on to be framed in every branch office across the company's global network. Years later, Denise's story would be featured in magazines and business journals. She was invited to speak at universities, business forums, even at the United Nations on the importance of language equity and invisible leadership. But when asked what title she preferred most, executive, director, speaker, Denise always answered the same. Janitor. Because that's where I learned to really see people. In her final year before retirement, she started writing a book. Not about business strategy or leadership models. But about listening. About noticing the people no one else does. About how the quietest roles often carry the loudest truths. The title? The Language of Dignity. It would go on to become a bestseller, not because it offered formulas for success, but because it reminded people what success actually means. And long after Denise stepped away from the spotlight, her legacy endured. Not in flashy campaigns or towering resumes, but in the everyday decisions of those she had inspired. A manager who paused before interrupting. A team that translated their emails. An intern who was finally heard. And a company that had once looked right past her, now built in her image. Because Denise Atwater didn't just change a workplace. She changed the way people see each other. And that is a story worth remembering. Years later, on the 10-year anniversary of the company's transformation, they held a special tribute in Denise's honor. The event wasn't flashy. No black tie gala, no corporate stage. Just a quiet ceremony in the community center she helped fund, a space now buzzing with young people learning languages, interviewing for jobs, and building confidence through mentorship. One young boy, no older than 10, stood beside a mural painted across the center's back wall. The mural showed Denise in her janitor's uniform, not in a boardroom, not holding an award, but pushing her cart, surrounded by vibrant words painted in Swahili, Spanish, Tagalog, Arabic, and French. Above her were the words. She saw us. So we saw ourselves. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked, "Mama, is that the lady who helped people speak?" She nodded, eyes filled with emotion. "Yes, baby. She helped them be heard." Denise never sought fame. She never craved titles. What she did crave, quietly, always, was change. And not the kind that shouts, but the kind that echoes long after the room goes silent. The kind that starts in janitor closets, hallway glances, misunderstood accents, and ends in lives rebuilt with dignity. In the final chapter of her book, Denise wrote, "There are two ways to lead, from the front of the room, or from the back with a broom. I chose the broom. And I wouldn't change a thing." She passed peacefully in her sleep 5 years after retiring. At her memorial, people came from all over, former janitors, executives, interns, refugees, security guards, CEOs. Each of them told stories, not of board meetings or corporate decisions, but of small, unforgettable moments, when Denise made them feel seen, heard, and worthy. No single statue was built in her honor. But in every hallway where someone pauses to listen before judging. In every break room upgraded because someone remembered where change starts. And in every voice once silenced that now speaks with pride. Denise Atwater lives on. Because true legacy isn't carved in stone. It's carried in people. And hers will never be forgotten. That a few months after her memorial, the company unveiled its newest initiative, the Atwater Fellowship. A global program offering scholarships and mentorships to multilingual individuals from underserved communities who have been overlooked simply because of where they came from or how they spoke. The application began with one simple question. What story lives in your voice? Denise's spirit echoed through every applicant who once felt unseen. Through every hotel, airport, hospital, or classroom where a person translated not just language, but humanity. Through every leader who paused to ask, not just what someone does, but who they are. At the corporate headquarters, her old janitor's cart was preserved behind glass, not as a symbol of labor, but as a monument to unseen brilliance. And just beneath it, etched in brushed steel. This was never just a job. It was the beginning of everything. Executives now walked the halls with a new rhythm, one that listened more closely, one that greeted by name, one that paused before assuming. The culture had changed. Not overnight. Not by force. But by example. By Denise. And if you walked past the break room at 6:45 a.m. sharp, before the first email was sent, before the morning rush, you could still hear the echo of laughter. The kind Denise sparked when she welcomed the overnight crew like royalty. That space remained hers, in spirit. The coffee machine was upgraded. The language books she donated still lined the shelves. And every employee who sat there, whether janitor or VP, knew they were sitting in a place built on respect, brick by invisible brick. Some stories are loud. Some are historic. Some roar across timelines and headlines. But Denise's? It moved like wind through tall grass, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. And if you're ever tempted to judge someone by what you see on the surface, just remember. That woman with the broom might speak 6 languages. She might carry a PhD in wisdom. She might be the reason a company finally found its heart. So ask. Listen. Honor. Because the world doesn't change from the top. It changes from the ground up. Just like Denise Atwater. Years later, long after promotions had shifted and executives had retired, new employees would walk into orientation and see Denise Atwater's story projected on the screen. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a North Star. They'd learn not just about the woman who mopped floors and spoke flawless Mandarin, Spanish, and Swahili, but about the human being who reminded an entire corporation what dignity truly looks like. Not dressed in power suits or seated in corner offices. But in humility. In service. In seeing others before being seen. Her legacy wasn't just a fellowship or a plaque. It lived in the changed hearts of every employee who now saw, invisible, people with new eyes. It lived in the janitors greeted by name. The cafeteria workers asked about their families. The interns encouraged to speak up, no matter their accent. That was Denise's revolution. Not loud. But lasting. And every once in a while, an employee would leave a note on the glass case surrounding her old janitor cart. Not for show. Not for the cameras. Just a quiet offering of thanks. Sometimes in English. Sometimes in Portuguese. Sometimes in the simple language of love. A life like Denise Atwater's doesn't just pass through the world. It changes it. One translated moment at a time.